Good morning, everybody. My name is Karen Tucker. I'm CEO at the Churchill Club. Welcome, and thank you very much for coming out to attend this program this morning. The San Francisco Bay Area's economic vitality and ascendance as a global center of innovation owes much to institutions of higher education. For example, even beyond academic excellence, Berkeley and Stanford hold the top 2 slots in the nation in terms of number of alumni who go on to found venture-backed companies. So today, in a rare joint appearance, we have UC Berkeley Chancellor Nick Dirks and Stanford University President John Hennessy to lend their perspectives on the future of higher education and what's at stake. And here to guide them in conversation, we have Quentin Hardy, Deputy Technology Editor at the New York Times. Before we start, some thanks are in order, in particular to Accenture, without whose underwriting this program would not have been possible. And I would also like to thank Dan Mogilov of UC Berkeley and Lisa Lappin of Stanford for their program partnership. Thank you. A few words about Churchill Club for our new guests. We are a preeminent technology and business forum privileged to convene people with new ideas since 1985. And we take very seriously our mission to encourage innovation, economic growth, and societal benefit. We encourage thought leadership, future focus, and always a pitch-free zone. We have 3 compelling programs for you between now and the end of the calendar year. They are listed in your bulletins. We hope that we will see you again after this morning. And then kicking off 2016, we'll be back at the Computer History Museum on the 21st of January with Brad Katsuyama, who is the founder and CEO of IEX, and also the subject of Michael Lewis's best-selling book, Flash Boys. They'll be here on this stage together, Michael Lewis and Brad Katsuyama, so that should be a very special program. And then on March 1st, we offer the pilot for an innovative new series called The Power of Celebrity for Good. In this series, we seek to inspire more broadly evolved social attitudes and actions that can equip us as socially responsible citizens, activists, and mentors. And the very first program in that series is in collaboration with Santa Clara University and Tribal Planet, and it will be Leadership Lessons from The Godfather, featuring Oscar-nominated actor James Caan. If you're tweeting, please use the hashtag Churchill Club, and you will find other Twitter pointers in your programs. And let's now let the party begin. We'll welcome Nick Dirks, John Hennessy, and Quentin Hardy. Hi, John. It's good to see you.
Thank you so much, Karen, and thank you. Okay.
No, is that?
Or you want to go in the middle, Quentin?
No, I'm good. This is fine. As you can tell, this isn't canned. So the topic this morning, and thank you all for coming at this early hour, the topic this morning is the future of higher ed, what's at stake. And I'm going to venture that the answer is everything. But we need to drill into that a little bit more specifically. And I think the best way to begin is for you, in turn, to talk briefly about what you do now, but almost as important, what you've been through to get here and how that informs how you see the world ahead. So Nick, why don't you start?
You mean the institution?
The institution and your experience at it.
And my experience. Both. Well, I came here now close to 3 years ago from an Ivy League school in New York because Berkeley, quite frankly, has always been, for an academic, a point of destination. It has been so superb in so many fields, top-ranked departments, schools, programs, and in fact, for many, many years, the only other university that gave it a run for its money was Harvard. And even at Columbia, we would look at the rankings and say, how could we get, this program, that program, indeed a whole slew of programs to approach the levels of consistent high quality as this university. Of course, we had our share of troubles in a private university in New York in 2008, 2009. But in reading about what was going on across the University of California, across many public universities, but also at Berkeley in particular, I was concerned when I first came here, what would the university be like? Was it really true that telephones had been cut out of every office? And furloughs had been taken on a semi-permanent basis for faculty and staff, and graduate student stipends were going to be fixed and reduced, and so on. Would the great University of California, Berkeley, really emerge out of this in any way comparable to how it has been for decades, really for decades? It's been one of the leading universities by every measure since at least the 1930s, and after the war, in the post-war period, it was the place to come, irrespective of whether you were thinking about public or private universities. What I've discovered, of course, is that Berkeley did emerge as strong as ever. It continues to be ranked among the very best universities in the world. It's one ranking that I think is very important for this morning's conversation is the reputational ranking that comes out of the Times Higher Educational Supplement, where 6 universities emerge as the top global universities. And interestingly enough, they're all paired. So you have Cambridge and Oxford, Harvard, MIT, and Stanford, Berkeley. And that reflects, I think, 2 things. One is that these are all universities that continue to be seen as really the gold standard. But 2, that universities benefit by having, this week's big game notwithstanding, by having a really powerful university close by. And those 2 universities often generate much more in the way of impact and a whole variety of ways of engaging a region than a single university can. And they actually support and help, and through a little bit of healthy competition, go at each other to be even better than they might otherwise be. And of course, they're sharing people all the time, including divided families. But the point really to respond to the question is that Berkeley continues to be incredibly strong. It has particular strengths that no private university has, partly because of the scale that it operates at, and because that scale is married to a deep commitment to access and affordability. And so the range of students who come to Berkeley, almost because it is a public university, but also because of the kind of interests of the institution, reflect such a broad spectrum and at such scale of a population that spans the full the full range between very low income to the top. You get a really meaningful, a really important place where, in some sense, what the New York Times called the social mobility engine of California can continue to thrive. But there are challenges, and we'll get back to that.
I think you identify something very interesting right from the start, which is you came to it where there were questions of identity and survival, and yet it is at the center of a kind of growth, development in the world, in technology primarily, that is absolutely steering the world economy. So it's both indispensable and had this initial sense of crisis, which fortunately you no longer feel is the case. John, your own experience is somewhat different because you were teaching at Stanford and then in the private sector and then came back. So talk a little bit about how that affects how you've seen Stanford and what you think is ahead for Stanford.
So certainly, as you pointed out, Quentin, most of my time was spent being a faculty member at Stanford, running research and teaching and doing what faculty usually do. I did have an experience in the private sector, starting a company, which was a unique experience, I think, and gave me real perspective on how to deal with some issues in context. Not that universities are companies, they are not. If you just look at how we operate, we charge tuition which is less than the cost of offering education. And then, by the way, if you can't afford it, we give you a discount called financial aid. It's an unusual model that universities have, but that's that partly is the important role they play in our society. I'd say the biggest changes I've seen over time, well, clearly the emergence of technology as absolutely crucial. You almost can't be a world-class university anymore without strength in engineering and technology. You simply can't do it. And that's a real change, I think, in terms of the impact that technology and science have on our society. But if I look at what's happened over time, the student body has changed the fastest and the most over time. We're now getting more than twice as many applications as when I started with presidents. We have the highest selectivity rate in the country, which means, unfortunately, that we are turning down lots of highly qualified students. We continue to get the best and the brightest students from around the world, small numbers as undergraduates, larger numbers as graduate students, and I think that's been vitally important to the health of the Valley and our ability to continue to lead by bringing in talent, a crucial thing. And this is where people want to come. They want to come to California. They want to come because this is very much a multicultural environment that supports them, both the students initially, but then when they go into their professional lives. So I think that's been crucial to our ability to maintain leadership. I think we'll continue to see it evolve. I think, as Nick alluded to, this vision that universities will provide the ladder of mobility for people to go forward is absolutely crucial. And I think we continue to play that role, hampered, I must say, somewhat by the quality of K-12 systems we have in our country. And if there is a discrimination in our country, go look at the quality of K-12 systems in underprivileged communities versus privileged communities. That's really not equity by any stretch of the imagination. So there are issues we have to work on as institutions and try to ensure that our students survive and do well and flourish and can go on to do great things.
I think you say something quite interesting there about the primacy of technology in society and in education now, and for the identity of a university. It has become an enormous driver, not simply for its material success, but the habits of technology are changing the way people learn, what they think about for careers, how certain social sciences even organize themselves, have taken on sort of technology aspects. When you think about how to deploy resources in the university, however, do you feel that tech may at times dominate too much, or that conversely, or similarly, postgraduate and research work gets a lot of attention, whereas the initial role of the university might have been to provide a successful undergraduate education, dare I use the word development of character, as part of the role of these things? Is that disappearing in the university's role simply so we can feed this tech beast?
Well, in the case of Berkeley, where its engineering and technology work has been really foundational, along with Stanford, you certainly want to begin by acknowledging the extent to which this university has been part of the explosion in technology, of course, that has been centered so clearly on this region in Northern California. Berkeley was known, of course, for fundamental research primarily, and I think for a long time didn't really get seen clearly enough for the contributions it was making to the world of technology. The self-driving car, for example, first funded by DARPA, but designed by Berkeley engineers, was driven on the Richmond Bay campus, where we hope now to build a Berkeley global campus. Google had this mapping capacity that was required to actually put it on a road outside the cloisters of Richmond Bay, but that's where it started. And the semiconductor obviously came out of both Berkeley and Stanford scientific research. There's a table over here bought by Cloudera, and I salute you, Berkeley grads, and so many other areas that are part of the rapid change and the increased profile that technology plays in our world. But yes, indeed, the question is, can it overtake a university? And what does it mean for undergraduates?
Does it steer things, ultimately?
And I think what's important now, because technology is so ingrained in the world that we live in, as you said, that we need to ensure that all of our students, and Berkeley, we have 27,000 undergraduates. But all of our students have some real sense of what it means not just to live in a world with apps, but to live in a world with big data, to understand the importance of data analytics, to have a sense of what it means to really both create but also interpret the extraordinary range of things that affect your lives, no matter whether you're in the arts or whether you're in social science or whether you're in engineering and science. And so what we're piloting this fall at Berkeley is a new course, a data science analytics course, which is a pilot, and a pilot which already has a set of connector courses that will connect students to public health, to questions around race and equity, but also, of course, to traditional questions in computer science. But build from that the possibility of having all of our students take a kind of core course in data science as they progress through their undergraduate degree. Now, the hope there is not that they all go straight into the tech sector as such, but that they all have a sense of the importance and have the skills to interact with in a meaningful way the new world we live in. Now, I see this very much as part of a new core curriculum that is aligned fundamentally with the kinds of things that at Columbia we used to do in courses like contemporary civilization. You're training students to live in the world by drawing on a range of things that are out there and that are going to be increasingly important. It shouldn't be the only thing. It has to be joined with other things that continue to think about what it means to educate a student body in being civic-minded and understanding the importance of living in a democratic society, of understanding how their voice needs to be heard and developed and mobilized around the role they'll play as leaders, both here locally and indeed more and more globally. And in terms of the university as a whole, I think what we've been doing, I'm sure what you've been doing at Stanford, is to connect the work that's being done in certain silos much more extensively across the system of the university as a whole. And we now have, for example, all kinds of projects that bring people working in very technical areas in contact with economists doing work on global inequality, with engineers who are designing new kinds of technologies that can be used in India or Africa to bring diagnostic biomedical techniques to the world at large, and so on and so forth.
So I'd say historically you have to look at something quite different that happened on the West Coast and happened on the East Coast. Stanford and Berkeley were both founded as American research universities, having both an undergraduate mission and a research mission. They were not founded based on the Ivy League model of an undergraduate, often a seminary-like institution designed to train young gentlemen for the law or for service in preaching. They were designed in quite a different way. And I think that's reflected in a number of things. Neither of us has a college that separates the undergraduates completely from the graduate students. Undergraduates get involved in research the same way graduate students get involved in research. And we have a dedication to both those missions. And I think, as Nick said, what I remind the freshmen with every year as they arrive on campus, I tell them, your undergraduate education is not about your first job. It's about something much bigger. It's about a foundation for your entire life. And studying the humanistic disciplines, studying the social sciences, which talk about how we live as a productive, cooperative society, understanding different cultures, having exposure to the arts that helps build creativity, dealing with issues of ambiguity and hard topics are vitally important. If you seek to train leaders, and I don't care whether those leaders are going into government, they're going to nonprofit, they're going to the academy, or they're going to the corporate world, they need that kind of broad background. They need to be able to work in the society we live in now, which is very different than the society that led the country 50 years ago. And I think that's a crucial thing that our universities do. They are, in some sense, the great mixing pot where students come together, learn how to work with students with very different backgrounds, learn respect, learn understanding. And that, I think, will be crucial for our success as a country.
I think you've said something very profound, actually, about the American frontier, immigrant, pioneer, whatever you want to put it, experience, where the there may be a balance, but there is also a stress. And the stress here is engagement with the new practical skills and technological development over an emphasis on perhaps more legacy, if you will, skills. And I speak as an English major, you know, for whom I hear this and I think, oh, data science, well, game over for me. But, you know.
No.
No, I told both my kids the only thing I know about the future is you'll have to study a lot of stats.
Yeah, it's the new textual analysis, very
Really
big
is.
now
right.
in literature research.
Don't get me started. We'll take this in a whole wrong direction.
I will be the first to say that there are limits to what computers can do, and if you hear a piece of computer music, if you see a piece of art created by a computer, if you see a novel written by a computer, you'll see that computers still have a long way to go to match the ingenuity of the human brain. And
I teach a course at the information school, and at Cal, and I used to say, you can't encode taste.
You can't.
And now I say yet.
Yeah.
Because they get a little better.
I agree with yet. I agree with yet.
You know, I'm just hedging that one now.
Yeah.
But it is very true that the type of education that was pioneered here in the 19th century and came into its own in the 20th century, which is technology-led and you know, based on scientific method, sort of the best theory possible at the time, and very research-oriented, has come to transform the world really, like, you know, rarely seen in human civilization, in a faster, more compressed way than ever was seen in human civilization. And these two schools have been extremely important in the development of that. And this does raise interesting questions about whether you are now victims of your own success. Because, well, we'll take up two topics. Let's start with the entire world wants to go to school here because you're inventing the future. Mm-hmm. How do you feel about that?
You know, we, of course, see it as a sign of the success of our universities and the extraordinary vitality of this region. But we do turn away a lot of students. Stanford has the highest selectivity rate in the private sector. We have the highest selectivity rate among public universities. And the reasons, I think, are clear to see. We, of course, also have lots of pressures that come from people in California feeling that access for California students has gotten more and more difficult, not just to Berkeley, but to the University of California system as a whole. And this is troubling because you don't like turning people away, but you also know that it's a sign of success. We're not going back to the time when anybody who got a B average in a public high school in California could just walk into Berkeley. You can't keep the system going that way. Mm. But I think you know, the truth is that we, even from the beginning, and I think Stanford was the same, we thought the institutions worked to bring together some of the best elements of different traditions that had been established across the country. It is true that both Berkeley and Stanford were established to provide a more practical education for a more differentiated group of the people than was seen as possible through the private institutions that existed at the time, most of them on the East Coast. It's also true that that then became the direct link for the development of the research university. So the great research universities in the late 19th, early 20th centuries as they emerged were not Yale and Princeton, by no means. They were Michigan, Wisconsin, Chicago, Hopkins, the first research university formed by a former president of the University of California, and then increasingly Berkeley and Stanford. They were among the top 8 or 10 research institutions. And of course, both of our institutions took advantage of the time after World War II to command an increasingly lion's share of federal money that was put for fundamental research. And the system that we have of fundamental research in this country, of course, is not to give money to institutions, but to give money to scientists. And so we attracted, in part because it was a nice place to live, in part because I think our predecessors were extremely prescient and very entrepreneurial. Some of the very best people across a great many fields who have routinely been able to secure far more than the average in terms of federal grants to support research in every area, from political analysis to high energy physics. And indeed, we have just continued to be a kind of not just magnet, but a kind of a beacon for how a great research university can power not just the university itself, but the region, which of course then reinforces and further strengthens our institutions. Are we adequate? Do we have enough spaces in our classrooms to add more? I've just been told we're supposed to take a lot more students next year at Berkeley. So we're working on that.
Quentin, I'd say we do have a problem, but it's a societal problem. It's what I sometimes call the U.S. News and World Report problem, right? You list out, you create this artificial weighting system. Why parents and young people going to college let U.S. News and World Report tell them what are the most important parameters?
I know the people who do those lists. It's such a trip through the sausage factory.
Well, it is a trip through the sausage factory, and it's the fact that that's their highest selling publication every year. So
there are certain
it has nothing
that
to do with revenue or money they make on it, of course. But it's created this craziness in American society where families think, okay, I'm going to apply to something that's number 5 and number 6 and number 7, and they think they're making a smart choice. I am shocked when I ask families. They know, well, my kid is applying and the schools are numbered this on the U.S. News and World Report. I said, and tell me, what is the average financial aid package that school gives? Tell me what their average graduation rate is. They have no idea. And so the most important things, which are affordability and graduation, which is what we really care about in the end, are being overlooked. We need to get back to American families. We need to get the message out. There are lots of great American universities and colleges, and there is a good one for every single young person in this country.
Let me just tell you a little something. I won't say which of your 2 universities this guy worked for, but I recently saw an admissions counselor, reader for one of your schools, and he said, I've got less than 5 minutes for every one of these essays, and I've got a stack I can't even see over, and I just have to push half of them off the desk before I even start to take it seriously. So that work you did with diseased people in Africa, I've read that one. That 4.5 average you've got, I've seen that one. That stirring story, I've seen all those. And it's a very harsh but accurate depiction of what admissions is now.
When you're taking 1 in 20, you have to quickly get down to a small number. How did we get
to such a preposterous situation?
I think it's driven by a few things. First of all, there are some really great universities in the U.S., and they offer an extraordinary educational opportunity, and they offer it at the undergraduate level, as well as the opportunity to get involved in research and other things. I think it's partly driven by financial aid and accessibility, and that's a key issue, right? The financial aid opportunities. If you go to a great public institution, you're getting help from the state to make it affordable. If you go to a small number of need-blind private institutions, but that's not a large number in the country, you're getting help with that. So that kind of drives families even harder. I mean, all these things get added up, but I think there's distortion created by the system. So too many students are applying to schools where there are lots of other good schools they could apply for.
But may I just add here, I think the plight of our public universities is particularly significant here. 75% of the students who go on for college go to public institutions. And increasingly the kind of across-the-board state disinvestment that's taken place in North Carolina, Wisconsin, Michigan, Texas, you name it, and California, has led public universities to be increasingly stressed when it comes to maintaining their research profile, and they, of course, have been great engines of research in many different fields. But it's put even stress in terms of what their capacity is to provide the kind of student experiences that students want and need. Increasingly so, in fact, when they come from very diverse backgrounds, they need more student support. We have more students than ever who need help with everything from mental health to special needs, and it's part of the success of the higher educational sector that we're much more inclusive than we've ever been before. But at the same time, I really have to say the pressures on the publics are huge. And when you look at the numbers, even between our two institutions, we have 27,000 undergraduates. We have more Pell Grant students at Berkeley, that is to say, students who come from families making less than $45,000, $50,000, than you have undergraduate
Total
students.
Yeah.
So the question of scale is huge. And when it comes to scale, nothing will replace the great public universities that have brought students into colleges that provide terrific undergraduate educational experiences and exposure to some of the cutting-edge research that's been done and is being done in those universities. So that's where I worry. I mean, in a way, the great privates are going to continue to be strong. And they're going to continue to provide wonderful experiences to the undergraduates who are fortunate enough to get in. But we have, I think, a growing crisis. And although there are lots of other great places to go to college, as you said, there actually are very few colleges that are actually fully need blind.
Correct.
Full need. When you tote them up, the number really turns out to be small. At Berkeley, increasingly, just to amend your statement, John, we use the tuition dollars that come in from students to return to students for financial aid. We actually don't get money from the state. That's different from the Pell Grant program for financial aid. In fact, we only get, of our total budget, only 12% comes in from the state. So in many respects, we're operating as a private institution. But on the other hand, we're deeply committed to access and affordability, and as such, you have to make sure that even when you raise tuition up to $13,000,
you hang a few more things up there, trust me, it adds up.
But even so, there's a little delta here.
Oh, yeah.
Between, and I'll just talk about Columbia, not Stanford. But even there, you need to make sure that the students who have needs have their financial aid needs met.
Now, I suspect part of what's going on in this rush to head to these most selective places is that in the back of people's heads, there is a sense that as much as technology has changed the world and is compressed and as fast as it's happened, it's going to be even more so. And it's going to be a very, very disruptive world. IT is now going to affect everything from human genetics to how you operate a taxi cab company, right? It just shot through. And there's going to be big winners and big losers. So there's a lot of pressure to be among schools and make human networks that have winners.
I think that's true, but I think what will happen will be that information technology becomes a tool used by many disciplines. Yeah. So initially, a lot of the big data analysis component comes out of computer science or statistics. But now, as you see it emerge, what's going to happen is the social science disciplines are going to pick this up. They're going to hire people who are data social scientists who are doing the kind of work. We just hired a guy who came to us from Berkeley, Raj Chetty, who's done this incredible work that appeared in the New York Times, looking at large-scale databases and understanding what factors influence a young person in terms of having a successful life and moving up the economic scale. What kind of schools they go to, what kind of neighborhoods they live in, what kind of family structure they have, what kind of social things they're involved in. That kind of analysis is now becoming mainstream by people in economics and political science and other social science disciplines.
No argument on my side. Where I was going was people are worried about how many jobs and how much economic stability there's going to be for 80% of the planet's population?
Sure.
Is that a good number?
Sure.
Something like that.
Students are certainly more worried about jobs and careers than they were in an earlier time.
And it's coming for you folks too in the form of online courses, which may not affect the most elite universities, but is going to completely shiver a lot of tertiary education.
Well, I think we're going to have to figure out how do we deploy that technology in a way that is effective for young people, right? It's not a magic wand. You pass online over it and all of a sudden great things happen, right? We know how to improve productivity if we wanted to. Just make all classes 200 students and above and make them all large lectures. We could get productivity that way. That's sort of what happens with the MOOC, right? You've got maybe hundreds to thousands of students, not much interaction as there would not be in a large lecture hall with 200 or 300 or 400 students. The real question is how to deliver an effective education in a way that's more efficient going forward. We're all going to have to deal with that issue.
Yeah, you know, the questions that have been raised, of course, by many in the public, and in my case, on a routine basis by the governor of our state, around the rising cost structure of higher education are real questions. I mean, these are not just distractions that I think we ignore. We both of us are thinking about how do you make a university more efficient at the same time that you acknowledge the role of human capital, the fact that we have some of the brightest minds in the world that we collect together to whom we wish to give a regular sustained access for our students. And what, of course, we learn as we've been rolling out MOOCs and thinking about online and using online technology to supplement the kinds of other pedagogical activities we mount on campuses is that students need to learn how to learn, and they have to learn, in particular, how to learn online. And oftentimes, the notion that you can just go out and sweep away these outmoded, Fordist production lines of seminars and lecture halls in the university in favor of the new technology is, just going to solve everything. And of course, we know that's not true. We know that students more than ever desire the residential experience. Even when they all crowd into our libraries at night, sit next to each other with their laptops or handheld devices, accessing the library materials online, but next to each other, asking each other questions, working with each other, face-to-face, as well as mediated through Facebook and other social media. And what the university does, in a way, is become even more attractive than it's ever been before, in the same sense that cities are more attractive than they've ever been before. Now, that doesn't mean that we aren't going to be able to feed into the fundamental fabric of our educational mission the use of technology. We're developing it. We're using it to indeed help us learn better how students learn. We are flipping classrooms. Last night I had a dinner with the advisory board for the information school at Berkeley, and I was learning about the new master's program, a master's of information and data science, which is a completely online course. But all the students who can will come to campus for a week or two. They want to meet each other. Yeah. They want to meet the professors. They want to see what the campus is. And at that level, of course, these are students who are ready to learn online. And even they want to have some relationship to the physical campus. Yeah. But the fact is that I think the notion that we're going to disrupt the university entirely, certainly universities like ours, is wrong. Even as the notion that we're Luddites and we're just going to resist for reasons having to do with the tenured professoriate or our own commitment to a particular kind of brand, the oncoming rush of technological innovation, equally wrong.
I think there's another factor here which is beginning to emerge that people haven't really paid much attention to, and that is if you look at the completion rates for people doing online courses, it turns out professionals who are post-college, who are really adding skills, do just fine. Yep. For them, this is about advancing their professional role. They're already well educated. They do just fine. You look at what's happened with experiments, for example, in remedial education or at-risk kids. This is not an effective way for them to learn. They need personal interaction. They need motivation. They need somebody who will help them when they're struggling with it. Now, our technology will get better over time. It'll get more adaptive. It'll get more supportive. But I think to think that you're going to replace a teacher, particularly for a child who might be struggling in school, whether it's in K-12 or a student who's coming to college, with just a computer, and they're going to be just as successful, I think is naive.
You make an interesting point. I mean, at present, the most successful cases are about learning the next thing. You're already established and you need to learn the next thing. And that is a model very much in accord with where the economy is going.
Right.
Where there is, a degree is a fine signifier, but I don't know a single student who thinks their education ends when they get their diploma anymore. And so you need to be inside that kind of flywheel, if you will, to develop it. Another aspect of, I know it's not a business, but the industry you're running is the role of TAs, undergraduate assistants, and star professors. Is this a healthy system where we have so many TAs picking up so much of the work and certain star professors attracting attention and getting wattage, but more involved with their startup or their lecture tours than with touching students?
You know, I think there are always examples that feed that kind of image of the university as made up of these different populations that occupy totally separate positions vis-a-vis the actual delivery of education. But the truth is that it doesn't quite work like that. I mean, for example, when Randy Schekman got a Nobel Prize at Berkeley two falls ago, he had to cut short his press conference because he was going off to teach his freshman seminar.
That's great.
And it turns out he's not unique. And our star faculty are deeply committed to teaching. They work with their graduate students. The graduate students are fundamental to their research. Fundamental to the research and apprenticeship of graduate students is also, of course, learning how to teach, which is what they do, and they are substantially working as apprentices when they're running sections and supplementing the lectures or large courses that are being taught by perhaps the more senior professors. And the truth is, we hire a lot of adjuncts who are not the kinds of adjuncts that you think about when you read the critiques of the university today. We hire people from the Silicon Valley to come and teach at the iSchool because they have expertise and they actually enjoy interacting with students. And a large number of the adjuncts that we hire are in fact professionals who do this because, not for the money, they do it because it gives them that kind of access to really interesting students, and also to, of course, colleagues who are working across spaces that where innovation is taking place all the time. So, you know, it's important for us, I think, to be able to counter some of the kinds of things that go on. It's not to say that there aren't universities where star professors don't teach, graduate students are dragged out to do the greatest part of the burden of teaching, and adjuncts are really ground down and exploited. But I think the way in which we've fashioned a kind of economy of teaching, learning, and research is much more connected than that image would suggest.
Yeah, I agree with everything Nick said. I mean, I've taught a freshman seminar. Most of our Nobel Prize winners have taught one. I think an interesting lesson is to see what we do in teaching the most popular course at the university, which is CS 106, the introductory programming course. 90% of the students at Stanford now take this, or 105, the other introductory course, which means, by the way, that most of the English majors take it as well, Quentin.
Right.
And there, we use a model. So we're servicing about 1,500 students a year in that course, normally about 1,000 in the fall quarter. So that does get taught in a large lecture format by one of the university's very best lecturers who gets rave reviews every time. And there we do use an interesting model. We use undergraduates as assistants in the course. They've already taken a course in preparation for doing this, and they teach in very small groups, 6 to 8 students per undergraduate. And the undergraduate really works closely with the students to really prevent them from getting bogged down in details and getting stuck on some topic. And one of the things about a computer science course is you fail to understand some basic concept, like what assignment means, or what recursion is, or what iteration is. You get lost for the rest of the course because you've missed the concept in week 3, you're done. You will not recover. And we have found that other undergraduates who've done very well in the course are the best ones for working in these small groups to helping students succeed. So it's a win-win. They get the joy and the experience of helping somebody else learn, and our undergraduates complete the course. And essentially, we have, from all different parts of the university, people come in and take this course and are successful doing it. They go home, see their parents, bring home a piece of software they've written, and their parents are really blown away by what they've been able to do. And then they feel good about paying their tuition bill.
Which is not trivial. We'll proceed to questions in just a moment, and I'll finish my part with a bit of a lightning round. I want you to each say to the other, one public, one private, what is the opportunity you see in the other's school? Which is the nice way of saying, what would you do if you were running the other guy's school?
John, you're going to have to...
football, Nick. No.
Really?
We're both quarterbacking next week, by
I
the
would
way.
fix his governance problem for him, because I think the governance of our public institutions, not just in California, but throughout the entire United States, is broken. Not only has the amount of money gone down, but the micromanagement, which is absolutely ridiculous of these great institutions, when it's only 12% of the budget, is out of control. So I would fix his governance problem for him, because I think they've done a remarkable job under an enormous burden.
You know, I have a job for you next year, John.
You're going to love it there.
Yeah. No, it is interesting that, I'll get to your question, but it is interesting that the less money the state has given us, the more they've actually been micromanaging and regulating us.
It's crazy.
You know, we established a kind of constitutional autonomy way back when, in the late 19th century, that stood us in such good stead, and really was the reason that that Berkeley became such a great institution. And and it was modeled on Michigan, that was another great public institution. And increasingly, that seems at risk. Now, of course, at Berkeley, we have a lot of envy for your governance, and certainly a lot of envy for your endowment.
It's not about the money, Nick.
It's not about the money. So let me keep saying that over. But I think, you know, one of the, so we have 27,000 undergraduates, 10,000 graduate students. We're being pressured by the state to take more students. It turns out it costs us more than in-state tuition to educate these students by a significant delta. And so maybe going back, reverting to your early question, you know, about selectivity, I might ask whether or not there would be an opportunity for Stanford to expand some of the educational opportunities it affords to the public. I don't know what that would entail, whether it would be opening up a larger undergraduate college in some sense, or using some of that beautiful space you have to build some more buildings that could accommodate greater numbers. I know that it's
from your
really
mouth
fine
to the county of Santa Clara.
Well, you have Santa Clara and we have Panorama Hill.
Yeah,
but
you do.
we can't even have more than 6 football games a year. I mean, of course, that's all there are, but we can't have anything else in a stadium because of our neighbors. But I wonder whether or not the kind of focus on your university, and obviously the kind of job you're doing in terms of powering the Valley and also becoming, you know, increasingly ranked as the top place to go as an undergraduate, aside from Berkeley, of course, wouldn't mean the possibility for some significant expansion.
Yeah. Well, we are going to expand. We just have to do it slowly because the average subsidy we're spending on a student is now, average over everybody, is $20,000, more than $20,000. So, and that's largely because the average for a student on financial aid is about $40,000.
Yeah.
So that's the big driver, and I don't think we want to change that. I think access is critically important, right?
But I do think that, you know, one of the issues that gets lost when you're talking about the contrast between public and private institutions is that in the research we do, and this is focused, of course, on research, but even in the education we offer and our commitment to access and affordability, you know, it's really impressive that at Stanford, if a student comes from a family making less than $125,000, they don't pay tuition. I mean, this is an extraordinary use of the endowment that's been focused on financial aid for undergraduates. I think it is important to recognize the extent to which we are, you know, joined at the hip. We are both out there trying, through our research, to make the world a better place. We're both out there trying to create the opportunities for students who might never have dreamed of the possibility of going to college, who certainly come from families who had never been to college. to give them the kind of opportunity that our country depends upon to make the ideal of meritocracy into more of a reality for more of our students. It's a huge challenge. I mean, this is where, I'm very proud to be at Berkeley, where we do give such opportunity to so many students, but we can't do it alone. And in a way, we both need to partner more to show that we're committed to the same kinds of values, which are values that are ultimately, I think, going to be, in a world of growing inequality, of growing anxiety around jobs, employment, technology, and the like, increasingly reliant on the university. And we all have to figure out ways to better fund both public and private universities so that we can continue to fulfill our mission.
Very good. I trust we have a healthy inventory of questions from the audience, and there are people in the back with microphones. Raise your hand and they will reach you.
I have a question about research, going back to the beginning of the conversation. You're both feeling very stressed in your investment possibilities, where you can put your resources. How do you balance applied versus pure research when you look at where you're going to put your resources?
I think we don't see it as a bimodal distribution. We see a spectrum, a continuity between applied and basic research. I mean, I think most of us would say we don't even do something that's really applied research in the sense of its development, it merges on development. We do what I would often think of as strategic research. There's an opportunity. That opportunity that a faculty member sees is often based on some fundamental basic discovery. So there's an opportunity to change, for example, a great result is this recent one that Steve Quake did, developing a blood test for Down syndrome. So you no longer need to do amniocentesis. Incredible innovation, saves money, saves lives, helps young people deal with a very difficult situation. That, though, was based on a very basic research finding that there are proteins, if you have a Down syndrome mutation, there are proteins in the blood that are in the mother's bloodstream. That's a very basic research insight that then got turned to it. So I don't think we see it as a one versus the other. We see it as a continuum across that spectrum.
Yeah, and to reiterate what John said, I mean, the truth is that a great deal of the things that we think of as applications of science come out of what we sometimes call curiosity-driven research. I mentioned Randy Schekman before for the Nobel Prize he got, which had to do with cytosis in cells and ultimately the development of insulin for treating diabetes. But he got there from doing basic research. And we can give example after example of where fundamental research has led to extraordinary discoveries. I mean, it's been true in every area, including in the history of the computer. But again, we've been advantaged in this country by a federal structure for funding research that has genuinely valued basic research. The big challenge we have right now is that federal budgets have been flat for far too long. Needs for research support are going up all the time. We're ever more reliant in every area, from biomedical to you name it, any field in technology for the kind of research, physics, climate change, and the like, for support for research. And what people don't always recognize is that support comes from a few agencies in Washington for the most part. 3% of our research budget, by the way, at Berkeley comes from the state of California. It's probably the same at Stanford. I mean, it's a very small amount. Over 50% comes from federal granting agencies, and the rest comes from either private foundations and gifts, private foundations or private gifts. We are at a time when we're going to, I think, see pretty soon a real crisis around funding research, both basic and applied. We have made partnerships, and we will continue to make partnerships with the private sector when we can engage in research that will simultaneously address our academic interests and needs and fulfill the interests of industry in developing research around their own particular products, interests, market needs, and the like. But we do not want to cede the space of support for fundamental research, because that has in turn been, I think, one of the reasons why the American Research University is the gold standard. And by the way, there are a lot of other countries that know that, and there are places like China that are building universities, and they're building them to compete with us. And we shouldn't just take for granted that we're the best. We're the best because we have funded our research universities at the highest levels. That is at risk.
Next question.
Carl Hewitt, given the current decline and flatness of the federal support, right, and the stinginess of industry, what can we in Silicon Valley do to try to turn around the situation at the federal level to make them realize the fundamental importance of investing in higher education?
Well, Carl, I think you hit the nail on the head there. Rather than have the universities go to Washington and plead their case with the federal government, it is much more important to have the high-tech industry, to have the pharmaceutical industry go to Washington and plead the case for the federal investment in science. That is much more effective. And what we need to do is get that high up on the list of things that corporations are telling their people representing them in Washington. It needs to be right up there. R&D tax credit, investment in the universities. Those need to be the key things that they accentuate. And I think that's where the solution will lie, hopefully over time. Obviously, we have a complex federal budget issue to solve. We've got to solve the growth of entitlement spending, because if we don't solve entitlement spending as a society, there's going to be no money for national defense, for education, for research, for highways, or for anything else. So we as a people need to figure out how we're going to solve that problem and preserve what's really great, which is we have the best research universities in the world.
Yep.
Everybody comes here to study them. If we don't continue to invest in them, we won't have the best research universities in the world. You'll be going across the other side of the Pacific to see them.
Next question.
Hello. Rosalio Vargas, Dynamic Academy. How do you see 1920 schools compared to today's schools making good workers on which we need good leaders?
1920 schools?
You mean what was the context of the 1920?
Well, I see them as the same.
Yeah.
Like the schools. And there's 80%, as you said, struggling. And you call it mental disorder, like ADHD and all that. But I believe that everyone has a natural genius.
You know, things have changed over the years in a very dramatic way. You know, 50 years ago, if you didn't come from a middle class or better family, if you didn't go to a good K-12 school, if you didn't have certain opportunities, you didn't go to college. And that was okay, because you could go to high school and you could get a decent job and earn a middle class income. The problem is lots of those jobs have disappeared in the US, and a college education is increasingly important to get a job that will support the standard of living you need in our country. So we now need to embrace a much larger set of students. It's not that everybody needs to go to college. That's not the right model. But a larger fraction of our population needs to go to college. And we struggle with a very deep problem. People think just because kids get admitted to school, to a college, they're going to graduate. Only 65% of the students who start full-time in a four-year institution complete a degree. And if you look at our community colleges, they struggle even more. We need to worry about that problem, because that's where the future of the American workforce is.
Yeah, no, these issues of both access to good colleges and then graduation, they're huge. And we don't live in that world. Public universities, as a rule, have a lower graduation rate than private universities. But if you extend the period of time, the great publics actually are right up there. I mean, we have a 6-year graduation rate of 92%. I think that's pretty much the same as Stanford. It turns out, because we have such a diverse student body, that a lot of them work, some of them take a semester off, family or other issues get in the way, but they come back and they finish, and we work very hard to make sure they do. But you know, if you look even at the much heralded experiments taking place at Arizona State University, it's a place that has a graduation rate of 45%.
Right.
And that's, you know, a significant institution. It's also the largest public university in the country in terms of number. But a lot don't make it, more don't make it through than do.
Yeah, and I think if you have access without completion, you've only solved half the problem.
Next question.
It hurts? Yes. Mr. John, Mr. Nicholas, I appreciate the opportunity and thank you for leading the world. It's very important and great responsibility that you have with the students to drive the world to a better place, like you say. But I would like to hear your plans to how will you help the people to connect with inner self. Now the technology is connecting in the outside, but what will you do to connect the inner self of the persons, because the whole persons must be taken in consideration to be a better world. Thank you.
You know, I think we completely agree that the task of education is not just to teach a set of skills. I mean, even going back to the origins of our universities, with the push towards more practical education, there was also a recognition that students coming to college had to have some kind of, well, at the time it was called a moral education, but it was an education about what it means to be human, what it means to think about the really big issues that confront us as human beings, both individually and as members of a society. And one of the reasons that we insist on this notion that it takes 4 years to get an undergraduate degree, and indeed with the state of K through 12 education being what it is, that seems ever more important. But one of the reasons for that is that we actually build into our curriculum, for all of our students, a sizable commitment to what we call the liberal arts and sciences. Mm-hmm. And those include courses that attempt to expose students to some of the great texts, some of the great issues, some of the great debates that have been part of our history over time, and to ask the students to wrestle with them. And we think about that in part as a civic education. How do you make students actually full participants in a democratic society? But we also, whether they're contemplating works of art or reading literature or performing music, understand that this is a time of life when students really need to engage some fundamental issues having to do with what it means to be alive, with what it means to take on the kind of issues that adults will then, of course, be confronting in all kinds of ways across their lives. And we hope they can draw upon the resources they get in some of those early courses. Recently, the governor of California suggested that we should increase the number of 3-year degrees at Berkeley. And we do actually have some students who go through in 3 years, usually because they come in with lots of AP courses. But the worry here is that students who need it most are not going to have that opportunity. Mm-hmm. And we have been told increasingly in our society, this is a luxury. You don't really need to spend all this money, whether it's taxpayer money or student money, and of course it's less and less taxpayer money, to engage in these kinds of, this kind of educational folly. I mean, that's how it's often seen. But I think at Berkeley, and I'm sure at Stanford, at Columbia, we do believe that there's something really fundamental to the kind of education that we offer that allows students to engage themselves and to use some of the great works of art and some of the great debates about politics and even some of the great questions in our economy and even the issues that are being raised by technology. What does it mean to be human in a world in which increasingly the things that we thought we did exclusively turn out to be done just fine by technology? Well, we build that into the curriculum. And it turns out when students come back for their 25th or their 50th reunion, they're often talking about those courses. They're saying, you know, when I read these formative texts, they stayed with me.
Yeah. I agree.
Next question.
Hey, Professor Dirks, thanks for the shout out at Cloudera. As we are co-founded by both Berkeley and Stanford alumni, it's great to see both of you share the stage. So a question for Professor Dirks, the historian, and Professor Hennessy, the technologist. So what can we do in the Silicon Valley to help to ensure the strength of both of your technology programs and humanity and social science programs to help ensure that they both thrive and both continue to contribute to the greatness of Berkeley and Stanford?
You know, we are always trying to make connections with our alumni in particular. The wealth of a university like Berkeley's is not measured in its endowment, and it's certainly not measured in its state allocation. It is often expressed, however, in the lives and in the commitments of a vast circle of alums. We have 450,000 alums. Very few of them stay connected. This is actually something that public universities are working to change and to do a much better job of in ways that reflect what many of the top private universities have done much more effectively. But we want you to stay connected. And that can mean any number of things. It can mean giving us advice when we're putting together a new, say, master's course in data science for the information school. It may mean providing internships for our undergraduate students to give them a sense of what life in your company is like, and to show them that you're dealing with all kinds of issues every day, and they're actually rather more complex than just the textbook or the classroom would suggest. It might mean providing resources for students from underprivileged backgrounds to have these educational opportunities. It could mean any number of things, but most of all, it comes from staying connected. I think the important thing that we're both of us saying this morning is that we have the very best research universities in the world, and actually Northern California has two of the very best research universities anywhere too. I mean, this is part of the reason that this region is so successful. But don't take us for granted. Don't forget us. Stay in touch with us. And remember that ultimately our success will depend upon your support.
You know, I think looking at how American universities have survived, I think we look at government funding, we look at great privates and great publics together, very unusual. In the rest of the world, it's almost divided into publics versus privates, and very few countries have both, strength in both. But the other piece of that is philanthropy. That's an American tradition. It is not a tradition in Europe. It is not a tradition in most of Asia, although it's emerging now in parts of Asia. And it has strengthened our universities. I remind our incoming undergraduates that their education, they're there, and the quality of their experience is partly due to a gift that somebody else that had that great experience made to the university that enables them to have that kind of education.
From its origin.
From its origin. From the origin with the Stanfords in our case, right? It was their gift to the university, as they say, to the future students of California. And that is a great tradition, and one that I think we have to keep up.
Okay, time for 3 more questions.
Okay, thanks. So I'm from SAP, where I'm leading a network of 2,400 universities around the world. And when we started doing that, it was mainly to build a number of great talent out there to recruit into the big SAP ecosystem. Many companies of the world are running SAP. But what we see right now, because of digital transformation, and that's what I would like you guys to elaborate a little bit on, because we talk a lot about the student, which is very, very key, because it's the mind of the student who will shape the future. But we, as you said, we are seeing that the world of the student are trying to come to Silicon Valley, are trying to apply for your great schools, but we also see that the company of the world are coming to Silicon Valley. So my question is, do you see that you will invest more, do more, much more than you do today? I know you do a lot, but much more, engaging with the industry of the world. You can call it kind of like more kind of, yes, research, but more co-innovation. I know at Stanford you have this great network with Larry Leifer, where you are having, I call it the innovation belt to universities around the world, where you work with the Audi, the Deutsche Bank, the great companies. Is that something we would see that would expand we hope so from SAP, because we see right now that the mind of young people is helping SAP's compass to build the future solution. That's my first question. Are you going to expand that? Second question is, what is your role? How do you see? I know you are talking a lot about the young people, all the great young people, which is important, but what do you see your role is, or will you have a role in educating more the, my age, I kind of like the people who did go to school and now coming back to school. Are you going to expand education program for executive education or professional education in general? Because the whole world are going through this digital transformation where everybody kind of need to go back and rethink that whole thing. So that was my two questions.
Yeah, okay. Yeah? Well, maybe I'll take one and give you two.
Whichever one you prefer. The answer is yes, yes, I think.
Yes. I was going to give that answer. But just to question one, I just wanted to give one example of something we're doing precisely along those lines, which is to say I mentioned the Richmond Bay campus that we have at Berkeley, where we launched the first self-driving car. But it's now being planned to be what we call the Berkeley Global Campus. And we're inviting in both international universities, but also industrial partners to create a new kind of space, which will be a much more porous space. It'll be a global space. It'll be a space where we work together around global challenges, whether climate change or data issues or cybersecurity or precision medicine, any number of things. But we're seeing this as a space in which precisely co-innovation will take place with researchers from around the world, not just from universities, but from industrial partners, some hopefully perhaps here at home, and others in companies that have a foothold around the world. We think it has to be done in a multilateral way. It can't be done by a single university. We think it has to be done globally. And we think it has to be done across the usual sectors of the university and the private sector. So that's an example where we're actually providing a kind of laboratory to see whether we can increase dramatically those kinds of partnerships.
So when I arrived in Stanford in 1977, maybe you weren't quite born yet, but if you were a young woman at that point. I taught, the very first course I taught was taught online. And it was taught online with an old closed-circuit TV system that we used in those days. Today, we teach those courses all the time. They're online now, so they're not taught with this old closed-circuit TV. We have tens of thousands of students in the Valley. Increasingly, we're doing short courses in the business school as well, because there's demand for something other than the traditional MBA, right? It's executive education. People in the Valley don't have 2 years to take off from work to go get a traditional MBA. So we've had to think about how do we offer them an opportunity that helps them develop leadership skills and management skills or technical skills. And I think you're just going to see that grow. The lifelong education model is the future, and universities should be deeply invested in that future.
Next question.
There is a substantial body of employer comments and a substantial body of academic research, including brand names, institutions such as yours, indicating that undergraduate students are not learning how to think critically. How do you react to these statements?
Well, there is indeed academic research that suggests that we have a growing crisis. The most famous work that was written to that effect by two sociologists academically adrift used the CLA to make some rather damning comments about the critical thinking capacities of students who've gone through four-year educational degrees. Not at Berkeley or Stanford, by the way. But in a way that both, I think, takes us back to what John talked about as perhaps an even greater crisis, which is the state of our K through 12 education. As well as, I think, and in this case it reverts to some of the things I was talking about more generally, to some of the challenges of Tier 2 and 3 public institutions where most of our kids go to college. And when you have a university where you simply don't have the resources to engage students as individuals, to provide them the support they need, to challenge them in ways that is very labor intensive, right? I mean, it means you have to do the iterative pedagogical teaching that requires more than simply checking off a box if somebody hands in an exercise or whatever it is in a class that's got 400, 500 students. It's very hard to make real educational progress there. And so we are concerned about those kinds of studies. I do believe that one of the things that we do in the great institutions, and I think we're unparalleled in that regard, is we take students from a lot of different backgrounds who in the first year might think, oh my goodness, I can't compete here, and get them to the point after 4 years where they're as good and sometimes better because they're hungrier than any of the other students, and they go out and they do extraordinary things. And we do, as we've been trying to say, train them to continue to learn how to shift. You said, John, we're not training them for one job. In fact, at the moment, students on average will have 6 different jobs, and we think in the future it's going to even be an exponentially more than that. So we think we're doing a good job, but it takes resources to do that. And the current, sort of refrain that we get from Sacramento and Washington and other places, of course, as well, is just that, just be efficient, just churn students through, just get them in and get them out. And we have an obligation, as you rightly point out, to do far more than that, and to do far more than that for a much broader spectrum of our society.
Oh, yeah, I think if you take one example, learning to write well, there is no way you can teach with a lecturer standing up there and 200 or 300 or even 100 students in a class and teach people to be good writers. It requires somebody sitting down individually, looking at a piece they've written, taking it apart, saying, why did you write this sentence this way? Why didn't you structure it this way? Why didn't you do this? That kind of intensive learning experience, which does, I think, produce real learning outcomes that are observable, is not something you can do in a large lecture format. It's going to require a hands-on approach to teaching. And we need to keep that in mind if we want to produce people who are really capable.
Last question.
Len Chustek, Computer History Museum. Returning to the theme of whether undergraduate education is too narrowly focused on tech, should engineers know who Chaucer and Botticelli are? I was at the opening of the new Yale campus at Singapore last month, and they're trying a new retrograde experiment of requiring for the first 2 years all undergraduates to take a fixed set of courses, no electives. They study things they didn't think they needed to know. Is that a good idea? And if you had a magic wand, would you do that at your institutions?
So we have a broad set of liberal arts requirements. Students have to take courses ranging in things from confronting diversity and how to live and be successful in the diverse world in which we live here, just in the state of California. They have to take courses in ethical reasoning. They've got to take a course in creativity and the arts. So we've got a firm foundation of courses like that. I'd say our experience in creating a fixed, predetermined curricula with no electives is that students do not find it as engaging as they would when they get a choice to choose, not to blow up the entire framework and not take courses in critical areas, but to choose, I want to take this course in this area or this course in this area. In some sense, take history, Nick's field. I don't care what period of history they decide to study. What I want them is to delve deeply into history, to read some original sources, to look at why people are making decisions, to understand how things go, the interplay between society and leadership and history and how it works out. That's what I want them to know. Whether they do it about ancient Greece and Rome, or they do it about the United States, or they do it about Europe. That's probably not the important thing. And they will be more interested if they get to choose which time and period in history they study.
There's been a continuous debate between those who've advocated for electives and those who've advocated for a fixed curriculum. Charles Eliot at Harvard was really the first major university leader to say, let's go with electives. Students should choose. And Nicholas Murray Butler and Robert Maynard Hutchins at Columbia in Chicago respectively, were ones who believed that there had to be a common core curriculum. I taught at Columbia. I taught in the core curriculum. It was wonderful.
Yeah,
it was wonderful. What was particularly wonderful about it was that every student in the freshman or sophomore class was taking some courses and reading some texts at the same time together, so that when they would come from a section of 22 fellow students and then go for lunch, they would sit down and all of them were reading Adam Smith or Edmund Burke at the same time, and they could get involved in a debate. And they had something to talk about other than football. Well, at Columbia, they didn't talk about football.
The reason for that.
Not without lots of libations first.
or movies or whatever. But we don't have magic wands. I chuckled because, you know, the magic wand idea does occur to us usually at 2 in the morning, but we wake up and we are soberer then. And what we do try to do, I think, through our existing curricular capacity is to ensure that students do have a kind of breadth that does expose them to, again, not just a range of disciplines, but to a range of questions that draw from multiple disciplines. One of the things that always worries me about undergraduate education in this country, and it's true everywhere, is that we sometimes, as a professoriate, try to do for undergraduates a small version of what we do for our graduate students, rather than thinking about how students come out of high school and really need to have a different kind of exposure to a range of questions as well as texts and skills across the full spectrum of the curriculum. And so, you know, I've inaugurated at Berkeley certainly an undergraduate initiative in which we're looking at what we call a Berkeley curriculum and trying to produce at least a menu that is, if not a prefix, certainly, you know, a limited menu that can contain some things that faculty and students can come to agree every student should pick from, at least for some of the key things they do during their early years. I always worry when students think about majoring too quickly and feel that the major somehow becomes their primary identity as a student. And this is something that, particularly in a large university like Berkeley, one sort of works against. But the truth of the matter is that you know, our institutions continue to value a liberal arts education, and we are increasingly in the minority. So one thing I really want to stress as we close this morning is the importance of remembering the liberal arts is not a luxury. It's not a luxury. It may seem that way, but it's no more a luxury than, to go back to the earlier question, than taking time to remember that we're human beings and that we're educating young students not just to have skills, not just to have careers, but to be better human beings. And that is one of the things that keeps us going, even when we get up very early in the morning and have to brave traffic to get down to a breakfast like this. Believe me.
Not to mention a knowledge of your forebears and what they've seen fills you as a human.
Sure.
Indeed.
Absolutely.
Karen.
On behalf of our audience.
Thank you.
Thanks, that was great.
Thank you very much, Nick, John, for sharing your passionate perspectives and insights with us. We know you have many demands on your time, and we really appreciate that you chose to spend the morning with us, and Quentin for leading this discussion so beautifully. Thank you. As a small token of our appreciation, we have for you, for your leisure time, a Churchill Club speaker t-shirt.
Right.
Please wear that in good health.
Great.
A recording of this program will be posted on the Churchill Club YouTube channel, hopefully within about 24 hours. So we hope that you will find that to be a useful resource. Most of our other programs are posted there as well. So please, if you enjoyed this program, do tell others about it and allow them to access the conversation as well. You have been a wonderful audience. Thank you so much. See you next time.